All right. Welcome to the Knicks Film School Postgame Show presented by BetUS. Uh, despite despite what is going to be a very, very interesting postgame, I will start by saying it's good to be back. I've not sat in this chair for one of these in about 10 days. Thanks to DJ and Benji for filling in for me in my absence. They got to talk about two very different games. And now I am here to talk about this game, which was going a very, very, very particular type of way. And it was going to give us a lot of very interesting talking points. It was not going to be uncomplicated. And then the run happened. And then what was going to be an interesting post game with some interesting talking points that overlapped and maybe ran into each other and made things a little messy, got even more messy because, wait a minute, did the Knicks actually do something against one of these teams? And yet, at the end of the day, we are sitting here and we are talking about another 20-point loss. I don't care that the final score was less than 20 points. That was a 20-point loss. The fact that the Celtics literally took two knees on two consecutive possessions to end the game is all that matters. Much less than the fact that the deficit actually was 13 by the end. And I wasn't sure how I was going to open this show through all of that. And then I guess I am thankful for this, which is that in the final 4.5 minutes, Tom Thibodeau made my job very easy because he let me know that there was only one proper way to open the show, and that is with him. Look, Tom Thibodeau is an insane person. I don't think anybody has any question about this. The only question is about whether you fall on one side of the aisle for his insanity or the other side of the aisle for his insanity. And through pretty much thick and thin, I've wavered at times ever so slightly, but through thick and thin, his insanity has largely been what has endeared me to him. That is not the case right now. And that's not the only Tom Thibodeau discussion that we're going to have on this post game, but it is inextricably intertwined with the larger Tom Thibodeau discussion that, yes, is now a discussion. It should be a discussion. And the way the Knicks have come out and performed against these teams this year, if you are not having, as an organization, some thoughts about your head coach, then you're not doing your job. And if I open this post game talking about anything else other than Tom Thibodeau, I'm not doing my job. The decision to reinsert Karl-Anthony Towns back into that game, I don't care if Karl-Anthony Towns was kicking and screaming and jumping up and down like a small child. Not that he could do that because he could neither run nor jump. Begging to come back in the game and fight, go down fighting with the rest of his team with 4.5 minutes left. And let's just, because sometimes, we get caught up in generalizations and, we lose sight of specifics. Let's get the specifics down very, very clearly. With 4 minutes and 12 seconds left, the Knicks were down by 18 points when Karl-Anthony Towns came back in the game. And they did not have the ball. On the ensuing possession, the Celtics scored to make it a 20-point game with under 4 minutes to go. Now, can you go back and find instances throughout NBA history where one basketball team outscored another basketball team by 20 points in the span of 4 minutes? Yeah, you can. The Knicks might have actually came close in this game. But there was just no universe. There was just no universe where that sort of thing was going to happen here. And Towns went back in, and he stayed in, and he stayed in, and he stayed in. And wouldn't you know it, the final buzzer sounded, and there he was, still in there. And how fitting it was that in playing those final 4 minutes, it took him over 40 for the game. Ended up playing 41 minutes. Insane, and nothing good about it. We've had lots of conversations. I've had lots of monologues over the years talking about how the mentality of this coach was necessary for an organization that cared about winning less than any organization in the NBA, perhaps any organization in professional sports, and how you needed a crazy man to come in and go full tilt, reckless abandon. Everything subsides in furtherance of winning. Not every game, not every quarter, not every minute, not even every possession, every aspect of every possession. And it is that drive and it is that level of insanity that, again, whereas maybe 29, 28, 27, some high number of other NBA coaches would not have put Karl-Anthony Towns back in that game. And look, sitting here right now, can I sit here and say, obviously, because I'm not a doctor, I can't. Towns made this injury worse by going back in. If he is questionable on Wednesday, if he misses the game on Wednesday, if he misses a week, if he misses a month, was that exacerbated, not exacerbated by him coming back in this game? I have no idea. No one is ever going to have any idea. But the fact that those questions are now out there and we have to ask them for what? For what? For nothing. It's crazy town. It's absolutely fucking crazy town. And as someone who has stood by this man and supported this man through thick and thin, it got under my skin something fierce. And that was after I had already watched a basketball game in which I had to ask myself some very difficult questions carried over from a couple of nights ago, Friday night. I forget it's not nighttime yet. It feels like it's nighttime on the Knicks. And now we will begin to transition into the larger discussion about this basketball team, which, again, is slowly becoming overshadowed by the conversation about this coach. The defense to everybody who has always pointed at Tibbs and said, this is crazy, that's crazy, you can't do it this way in the modern era. You have to be willing to bend. You have to be willing to budge in all of these certain ways. You have to modernize in this aspect or that aspect. The defense against all of that was essentially scoreboard. Look at the record. Look at the resume. Look at the results. Okay. We are going to talk a lot today about how the Knicks are not in the same universe. Not in the same universe as the Boston Celtics. Yeah, I know. 35-12 over 8.5 minutes. That happened. That happened. It was a real thing that happened. It got it down to 4. Might have woken the Celtics up, if we're being honest. Was it largely on the backs of some brilliant offensive performances by your two stars? Absolutely. Did the Celtics stars happen to go cold and kind of get in their usual level or their occasional, won't say it that much anymore, level of indecisiveness during that stretch? Yeah, sure. But it was a thing that happened, and that's worth noting. It's real. But if you put that one stretch aside and you go scoreboard for what matters for this team right now, their performance against all these top teams, we have now gotten to the point where there is an overwhelming degree of evidence that the chasm is so wide. And it comes back to this conversation of, okay, they're not in the same universe as these teams, but goddamn it, shouldn't they be closer? And that brings us back to the coach. Because unless you believe that the universe, the gap, the chasm, whatever word you want to use, between the Knicks and the Celtics, Knicks and the Cavs, Knicks and the Thunder, unless you want to believe that that gap is essentially a 30-point gap, because the average margin of deficit between the Knicks and the Celtics in all 3 of their games that they've played the Celtics this season, as far as I'm concerned, again, I know this ended up being a 13-point game. I don't care. It was a 20-point game for all intents and purposes. And if the Celtics didn't go up by so many points and they actually stayed engaged the whole time, might have been a 30-point margin of victory. But 25, 30 points worse than the Celtics. You got your doors blown off by the Thunder in the second game at home, and the game against the Cavs was so over that I mean, I watched the second half, but I spent the second half writing a newsletter because I was so sure of what was transpiring that nothing was going to change, and nothing did change. So unless you believe the Knicks are 30 points worse, 25 to 30 points worse than all of those teams, that the roster that Leon Rose in the front office has constructed is 25 to 30 points worse than all of those teams, unless you believe that, then there's got to be some other answer out there somewhere. And we could turn, I made myself a little cheat sheet. We could talk about all different things. We could talk about effort. We could talk about execution. And we could talk about scheme. We could talk about rotations. We could talk about all those things. And where can we close the gap? Is closing the gap, is it 40% effort? Is it or 40% execution, 30% effort, 10% rotations, 5% scheme? I know that didn't add up to 100, but as Alex knows, I'm not very good at doing math on the fly. Whatever those percentages are, right? Whatever those percentages are that you want to add them all up and you want to say, okay, this is what we need to target. We need to target these things in this way, in this degree to close the gap. Because again, they are not on the level of the Celtics or the Cavs or the Thunder right now. And yeah, there is a massive question. And this is my bigger takeaway from this game, which I'll get to in a few minutes. I know I shouldn't say a few minutes. I'll get to before the super chats, but I want to try not to go too long here. But this is important because whatever your percentages are for all those things, you can put it all under the umbrella of coaching. And in fact, I think you kind of have to at this point. The scheme obviously is coaching. The rotations obviously is coaching. And then the last two things are a little bit trickier. Effort and execution. And I save those two things for last on purpose. Because, one, those are two things you don't usually have to worry about with the Tom Thibodeau coach team. And number two, if you ask Tibbs about anything that's going on with his basketball team and about, well, should you change the scheme or should you change the rotations or should you change the starting lineup or should you, if he doesn't ever talk about trades, but if he was allowed to talk about trades and you asked him about a trade, should you make this trade? His answer is going to be every single time, is the execution there? Is the effort there? If it's not there, we don't need to have the conversation because until you get effort and until you get execution, nothing else matters. Once you get the effort and once you get the execution, then okay. Well, this is where it gets into the seedy underbelly of coaching conversations around the league whenever fans get upset with their coach. Because are you supposed to coach effort? Are you supposed to coach execution? Ostensibly, these are professional athletes. They should be able to execute the schemes that they are assigned, and they should be able to execute them with full effort. And again, over the course of his career, Tom Thibodeau has been as good at making sure his teams give full effort and execute properly, to say nothing of the preparation, which again kind of falls under the scheme, right? As any coach in the league. No one's better. Well, if they're going out there against these top teams and they look like they are unprepared, they look like they are hesitant, they look like they lack confidence, they look like they are executing, but executing with like one foot hovering over the brake and like tapping on the gas and not really, like, oh, wait, what gear am I in? We're driving a pretend manual transmission now. And if you do, well, then you're not really executing. And in terms of the effort, like a lot of coaches have said, and a lot of people have said, you can't coach effort, but we know that effort isn't and shouldn't be a problem with these guys. We know that. Go up and down the list. Every single player on this roster. Effort's not a problem with this. Come on. Who are you going to pinpoint that gets minutes for the Knicks on a as part of this rotation that has ever had significant effort questions asked about them? Even like Towns, like we talked about this so much this year. The guy tries hard, got most of the time. He tries really hard. Is he capable? And so when you start to go out, and they did this against Cleveland, and they did this tonight, and I would argue that they kind of sort of did it the last time they played Boston, and I would argue that they definitely did it the last time they played Oklahoma City. I would argue that the effort was lacking in all of those games. So again, getting back to that conversation about, well, no, you can't coach effort, but if your team is not displaying the requisite effort, and they look like they're out there and they're like uncertain and not confident in doing what they're supposed to do, well, then doesn't it all tie together? And if they're not feeling prepared, and if they're not feeling like they are capable of going out there with a plan that they could win with, and this starting five, I mean, God, I should pull up. I'll try to pull it up right now. Actually, this is funny. I'm on Pivot Fade, great website. Strongly recommend everybody checking it out. The last time I was on this site, I hadn't been going on it in a while, was the last Knicks Boston game when they lost by, it looks like 26 points. So in this game, the Knicks starting lineup, they played 19 minutes together. Actually, this isn't, well, I was about to say, actually, this isn't that bad. They were a -9, which doesn't sound that bad until you realize the net rating was a -24, offensive rating 102, defensive rating 126.8. So yeah, actually, that is pretty fucking atrocious. This is a starting five that doesn't look like it knows what it wants to do or how to do it against these top teams. So I don't know how many games are left this season, 20 some odd games. I've talked, and this is, the other major theme of, can we get to a point this summer where there is a move or a series of reasonably conceivable moves that this front office can make? Tweaks. They can't be much more than tweaks, barring something crazy happening. They just don't have the wherewithal to make moves that are much more than tweaks. Maybe something a little bit more than a tweak. But are we in the universe where they are tweaks, or like something one level above a tweak or two tweaks away from getting on the level of Boston? Because right now they are not on it. Again, it's a different conversation from how far the gap is, but that is still the conversation. Because at the end of the day, Boston is a team with no weaknesses. Cleveland, sure as shit, is looking like a team with no weaknesses, although we'll see if their lack of outside shooting with the two bigs together, although I guess Moby could shoot threes now, whether that comes back to bite them in the playoffs at any point in time. Same thing with Oklahoma City, team with no weaknesses other than maybe they don't shoot quite enough threes. But like Boston is the apex predator. They switch everything on defense and they're totally fine with it. And we could go through example after example, mostly in the first half of this game, where they were like, we'll switch anybody onto Karl-Anthony Towns. We don't care. And then he finally started making them pay a little bit, but it was how he started making them pay in the third quarter that I think was notable. And yeah, we'll talk about some of those positives. Because again, I do think that they got some real positives. It wasn't just Karl and Jalen going off. Like, they did some things I think that really worked, specifically on offense. The defense, I think it was honestly just effort, and Boston maybe missing some shots. But they could switch everything on defense, and then when they have the ball on offense, they have these two devastating shot creators. Are either Jason Tatum or, well, Jason Tatum I would put Brunson. If Brunson's a 9.8, I would put Tatum as a 9.7 in terms of a shot creator. But they're right next to each other. Jaylen Brown's a little bit lower down there on the list, but he is still an elite shot creator with the ball in his hands. They got two of those guys, and they surround those two guys by shooting. And oh, by the way, the one freaking guy who doesn't shoot anymore, even though he used to shoot threes, he killed the Knicks as much as anyone today. That was honestly the most exciting point about today. It wasn't anything with Tibbs, wasn't anything about how they were getting blown out. It was the fact that when they actually got back in the goddamn game, it was Luke freaking Cornett with his hustle, with his energy, with his offensive rebounding. You want to know how you know a team is in your head? You want to know how you know that this Knicks team has lost whatever semblance it used to have that made them special? when they were getting beat to boards that they would have never gotten beat to once upon a time. They're getting beat to those boards now. That's a sign for me that they don't think they could win. And that they're going out there and they're half defeated already. Either that or they're gassed. And if they're gassed, well, where does that go back to? So, yeah, Boston, great team. Great team. They should be favorites to win the title again. They are favorites to win the title again. They're great. Knicks are not on that level right now. That is painfully obvious. It should not be as painful or as obvious as it is. And for that reason, the conversation is where it is. So, look, they got 20-some-odd games. Are those games really going to matter? Because they don't play the Thunder or Boston or Cleveland. They don't play Boston and Cleveland again until April. And, frankly, I could sit here right now and tell you I'm not going to be putting any stock in those games unless something like a playoff position is at stake, which it won't be. I'm not going to be putting any stock in those games. And I would caution anybody from doing the same. So, what are we really going to find out over the rest of the regular season? Are we going to find out anything? I guess it'll show us something about this team's character if they don't come out of these two ass whoopings and implode in some way. I don't think that they are going to implode. They have too much talent, and I do still think the DNA in the locker room is still very strong. But I think the next meaningful #meaningful conversation that we have about this basketball team is going to be in the second round of the playoffs. And all these questions that remain unanswered about the coach, about the roster, about what changes they need to make, about whether they can make those changes, and what does that mean for Karl-Anthony Towns? Can he still continue to play the 5? All of these sorts of things. I really just don't think that we're going to be able to know the answers to any of this stuff for 3 months, 2.5 months, whatever it is. I'm praying they get out of the first round of the playoffs because, again, if you watch this team on the wrong night, you wouldn't be sure that they could even do that. So that's all I got. Happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about today. If you think I'm being too negative, you think I should be giving a little bit more credence to the, again, aforementioned 35-12 run over the course of 8.5 minutes. You think I should be making this post game about that? Tell me. Call me out. Happy to be called out. I would love to be convinced that I'm being too negative. I'm looking forward to going back and rewatching that. I'm looking forward to going back and picking it apart and seeing what they did that was really good. Because they did do some stuff that was really good, and I think it's important and it matters. But it's just not enough. It's just not enough, and it shouldn't be enough to give anyone any real hope about this team right now, as currently constructed, with this coach, with the way they run out there and do things. I just can't get there. Can't get there.